Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Balancing Responsibilities in a Hybrid World digital event hosted by the CMI Northern Ireland Board. My name is Mel, and I'm an event delivery coordinator at CMI, and I'll shortly be handing over to Olivia to begin this evening's event. If you have any questions during the digital event, you can ask them using the live chat box on the right of your screen, and we shall answer as many as we can during the Q&A. Today's session is being recorded, and it will be shared with you tomorrow for those who are booked to attend. The event recording will also be available on the CMI website and CMI YouTube channel. Now over to Olivia Hamill, Events Lead of the CMI Northern Ireland Board.
Thanks, Mel. Thank you, Mel. Welcome, everyone, to the CMI Northern Ireland online event of Balancing Responsibilities in a Hybrid World. Tonight, our first guest speaker is the brilliant Liz Black, who is the Head of Research and Insight at CMI. And Liz will be providing an overview and insight into the recent CMI report, Making Hybrid Inclusive, Key Priorities for Policymakers. So, Liz, over to you first of all. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Olivia, and hello to everyone out there listening tonight. It's really great to be here to talk you through some of our most recent research at CMI, which explores managers and leaders' roles to support hybrid working in the workplace. If we could go to the next slide, please. So most of you here tonight will probably be familiar with CMI, which is great, and obviously why you're here with us this evening. But for anyone who may not know less about us, I'll quickly give you an overview of CMI and why we are so interested in hybrid working practices currently. So the Chartered Management Institute has a vision to create better led and managed organisations. We look to take accidental managers to become confident and inclusive leaders. We offer professional development to managers and leaders, and are the only body who can offer the Chartered Manager status. We have a community of over 150,000 managers and leaders and work with education, university and education partners across the UK and also globally. Now, why are we so interested in hybrid working? Well, we know that the workplace change has been monumental over the last 2 years, and this has had a direct impact on the role of managers. Our Management Transformed research in November 2020 identified a trend in the workplace that we are all now very familiar with, which is the rise of hybrid working. It's a topic that at CMI we've continued to explore across the course of the pandemic, and particularly as we emerge as what we see as now as the tail end of the pandemic. And implementing hybrid working has been what perhaps we can describe as very experimental for many organisations over this period. And it's still very much a live issue for businesses. We know that many managers and leaders are still working out the best way to manage hybrid working in their own organisations. And we know there's no one size fits all. And CMI has been looking to build up an evidence base of what has been going on in organisations throughout the UK, in Northern Ireland as well, and advise on the practices that seem to be working quite well. Today, I'm going to give you an overview of our research that has looked to understand the landscape of hybrid working, the manager's role, and some of the challenges that we will continue to face as we adopt these new processes. If we go to the next slide, please. So just before we get going, I think it's worth talking about what do we mean when we talk about hybrid working. I think it's worth flagging that there are many different ways to work in a hybrid fashion. You may be working predominantly remotely with occasional time spent co-located with colleagues, working predominantly in a workspace with occasional time spent remotely. You could be doing a 50-50 remote workplace blend, and there are variable levels of remote working that are based on seasonal variations. So maybe sometimes you're in the workplace more than others. Indeed, if you're a manager, you may be supporting staff working in a mixture of these ways, which can present a lot of challenges. I also think it's important to say what hybrid working isn't, and it's an important point to make at the start of this presentation, that this shouldn't be confused with flexible working practices more broadly. Over the pandemic, many people saw the flexibility of remote working as being some sort of all-encompassing form of flexibility in the workplace, but it's simply one element that can be part of a broader flexible working spectrum, which may include other options such as compressed hours, part-time work, staggered starts and finish times, to name a few. If we go to the next slide, please. So beyond the pandemic, which as I mentioned has been experimental in its wide-scale implementation of hybrid working, why should organisations want to offer a hybrid working environment to their staff? What are the benefits to organisations in offering this form of flexibility? Well, firstly, it can help your organisation attract new talent. You may be able to tap into locations that you wouldn't normally be able to recruit from, either in the UK, in different regions across the globe. And we know that's particularly important at a time it can be quite hard, and it is definitely a challenging recruitment market. It supports a better work-life balance for staff. We all know about reduced commuting times that have occurred over the pandemic and how that's enabled people to have a better work-life balance, which we think is really important. For many, it will give people greater autonomy over their working day, and that autonomy will make them feel more engaged and more satisfied at work. It's also a form of boosting productivity for some. There may be some roles that just work very effectively in a hybrid fashion and can help your staff work in a more productive way. If we can go to the next slide, please. So I want to talk you through what's been happening in the world of work, at least for our manager members, since the pandemic in terms of working in a hybrid fashion. We've seen a big rise in remote working over the course of the pandemic. 87% of our managers reported in November 2021 that their organisation was working in a hybrid fashion. For the same group of managers, pre-pandemic, 49% told us they were working in a hybrid fashion. So that's obviously a big rise in numbers. We have seen a fundamental shift in the workplace, and we don't expect this to change. In October 2021, 88% of workers told us they would like to keep working remotely at least some of the time. And on average, over the course of a traditional 5-day working week, staff want to work remotely for up to 3 days per week, with just 2 in the workplace. Indeed, managers expect this to be a way that they manage their teams. 46% of managers expect staff to work organisationally in a hybrid way. That's with some staff working remotely all the time and other members of staff working on site all the time. And to build on that stat, an additional 38% of managers expect workers to be individually working in a hybrid way, with workers coming in at least 1 day of the week, but not necessarily working the whole week in the office. So although with changes in restriction as Omicron starts to subside, and we do expect to see a slight adjustment with where people are based for their work, we do expect to see a large number of managers and their organisations continuing to operate in a hybrid fashion post the pandemic. If we can go to the next slide, please. So we've looked to understand as well how prepared organisations are in terms of having policies and plans in place for supporting the management of the new hybrid working world. In October 2021, 65% of managers we surveyed reported that their organisation now has a remote working policy in place. This all seems very positive. However, 73% of these managers who have a remote working policy in place report that this policy is not well defined and the scope of what's included. This puts a lot of responsibility on a manager in terms of how policy should be implemented, that critical link between how policy is consistently translated into practice. And we also know that 60% of managers have not received training on how to manage their workforce remotely. And we definitely think that more managers will need training and better guidance on hybrid working to be able to support their teams effectively who may be working from home. If we could go to the next slide, please. And we think management is really key in all of this. Management behaviour and decision-making can be pivotal in enabling or limiting access to hybrid and flexible working. Management really matters in this new world of work. From our research, we know that over half of managers had responsibility for whether their direct reports could work remotely, and 63% of managers had responsibility for when their staff should be present in the office. But we know that 1 in 5 employers told us they were not happy with their organisation's working arrangements in terms of the hybrid arrangements in place. And I think from this perspective, it's therefore really important on a managerial side to have the right levels of trust and communication in place, which I'll come to on my next slides. So touching on issues of hybrid working, productivity and trust. Concerns about productivity are often cited as a reason that managers are concerned about the remote element of hybrid working. How do you know what your staff are doing? How do you trust what they're doing? We've polled frequently on this issue over the last 2 years, and we know that location has limited bearing on how productive the team is. It is likely that if there are any challenges with productivity, unless they are caused by technological issues with maybe working from home, such as poor Wi-Fi and other issues around infrastructure, productivity is likely to be the same as in the office. If you have an issue with performance in the office, this is likely to be the same when someone is working from home. If you have high performance in the office, this will still be the case at home. We know that critically, a good trusting relationship between a manager and their direct reports is linked with stronger productivity. Now, positively, we know that most managers do not monitor their staff performance in any way, and productivity using technology to kind of monitor that. Only 28% of managers say they do currently have something linked to surveillance in place. But again, this isn't directly linked to the location of a member of staff. We found that those who do use surveillance techniques, predominantly the numbers are the same, whether you're based in a workplace or whether the staff are remote. We can go to the next slide, please. We think that there is really an importance of communicating and connecting with staff who are based remotely and working in a hybrid fashion. The importance of communication with those working remotely was a really strong theme that emerged from our Management Transform research, which we published in November 2020. And we think this equally applies to managing hybrid teams. It's really important to stay connected and communicate. We know that 83% of managers believe that staying in touch with the remote staff through daily video or phone calls is considered important. We also know that statistically, managers are more likely to have regular one-to-ones with remote working staff to keep those levels of connection and communication up. This is compared to 77% of managers who have workplace-based staff. I also want to touch on evidence around how you connect your teams who might be in different environments, particularly with a focus on meetings, which is often a major challenge for many teams. Now, I don't think we yet have any definitive answers to this, but personally, I don't believe there is access to the right technology yet for everyone to be able to facilitate a well-run hybrid meeting. For many, the online meeting has been a great leveler, with a world-shared virtual meeting allowing everyone to have parity in the conversation. However, there may be types of meetings that are better placed to be in person than others, and I'll talk about that briefly. Many managers, though, are still not certain what they will be doing in a hybrid world when it comes to meeting. 76% of staff want to involve remote workers by giving them the option to join in-person meetings by phone or video call. But as mentioned, this may cause issues with equalities. 48% were considering holding all meetings virtually, and 17% were considering holding all meetings in person. The reality is meetings need to be run in different ways for different issues. Perhaps in person for collaboration and brainstorming, but hybrid meetings are very challenging to get right. If we go to the next slide, please. Finally, I just want to touch on some of the challenges around working in a hybrid way and workplace opportunities. At CMI, we've been very interested in assessing how those working in a hybrid fashion, often remotely, how that can impact upon inclusivity and workplace opportunity. For example, you may be running a team where you have some staff who are mainly remote all the time, and others might be based in the workplace all the time. So you're seeing one group of staff more than the other. We know from ONS data that prior to the pandemic, workers who were based at home tended to have lower salaries, miss out on promotions, and also work slightly longer overtime. That's unpaid overtime on average. At the moment, most managers aren't seeing this current hybrid working situation as having an impact on access to workplace opportunities on the whole. 58% of managers thought remote working would make no difference to promotion opportunities. However, 29% thought it would decrease opportunities. And there are concerns about specific groups and how they may be impacted by working remotely and having their workplace opportunities limited. In a sense, they'll be out of sight, out of mind. 36% of managers were concerned about the impact on young people. And although we don't have enough time to go into this today, at CMI, we have a lot of insight about a manager's role and how it's critical in supporting workers and younger people joining the workforce for the first time, particularly remotely. 24% of managers were concerned about the impact on those with parental responsibilities, whilst 23% of managers were concerned about those with caring responsibilities more broadly. However, only a third of managers report that their organisation has taken any steps to ensure that remote working staff don't miss out on opportunities. A third of managers reported their organisation had taken no steps, whilst 38% simply did not know. We think that organisation and managers might need to do a lot more about developing action plans around hybrid and remote working, which prioritise diversity inclusion, so getting those action plans in place. Thank you for listening. I'm looking forward to taking questions at the end, and I'm going to hand back over to Olivia for now.
Thank you very much, Liz. Brilliant, Liz. Thank you so much. Yes, folks, don't forget to please put any questions into the chat box. Also, let us know where you're joining us tonight from. I know there's a few people there's a person from Newcastle upon Tyne. There's also some board members from Northern Ireland. So hello, Emma and Janet as well. So our next guest speaker is Denise Black, who's the fabulous Denise Black, who is Executive Director of People and Culture at Invest Northern Ireland. And Denise will be sharing her insight and views of implementing a hybrid working strategy within her organisation. So Denise, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Okay, thank you, Olivia. And first of all, I suppose I'd like to thank CMI Northern Ireland for inviting me to speak tonight. And secondly, thank Liz for a very broad and thought-provoking opening. As the slide said, my name is Denise Black. I'm the Executive Director of People and Culture for Invest Northern Ireland. And I think it's relevant to say I was appointed to this role on the 20th of April 2020, 4 weeks into a full lockdown. So it wasn't ideal timing for a people director to be locked up at home, I have to say. And the reality is nearly 2 years later, I probably met about 50 out of our 580 local staff in real life, as the in vogue term is at the moment. So I do feel I'm sort of well placed to talk about the realities of trying to connect and engage when working remotely. So that's who I am. Then who's Invest NI? So as the next slide shows, Invest NI, we're the Northern Ireland's regional economic development agency. And I like our vision in the one headline of we grow locally to compete globally. We want to champion the growth of innovation and exports to build a strong local economy that can compete on the global stage, and also be a world-leading business development agency as well. So that top photo is our head office, but I also wanted to put in the bottom right photo, and that our more public claim to fame for any of you who were Line of Duty fans, were that we were the filming location for many of Superintendent Ted Hastings' interrogations, and that was a location scene there where they were filming the man himself coming down the stairs. So we were, of course, supporting the film and tourist industry as well, as there were numerous hen-dos and photo opportunities just after the last series closed there. So I just thought I'd put that in. But back to the sort of primary purpose of Invest, which the next slide sort of shows, of how do we achieve our vision. So we have 650 staff working across 5 regional locations and then 24 international offices. And our international reach goes across to all parts of the east and west coast of USA, Europe and Russia, Asia Pacific, India and Middle East. And I'm very sad to say in nearly the 2 years I've got to travel nowhere, but I'm hoping this year to certainly get out to Boston maybe in April. In relation to our business groups, this is very timely because literally in the last 2 weeks we have reorganized our business groups at the start of an organizational design transformation. So on the left there, you see our corporate services, which are finance, people and culture, marketing and comms. The key enablers, I would say, to any transformation or any organization, but I may be a bit biased in that. And then on the right-hand side, we've a dedicated transformation team set up to help us embed hybrid and a lot of the other changes that we're bringing in. The strategy and partnerships team, very quickly then, we're aligned to the Northern Ireland Executive Economic Agenda and the Department for Economy, who are our parent department in relation to their strategy. And then our commercial teams, very much the international and the sector teams, which the next slide just shows us the final slide explaining who we are. But I think it's important for those of you tuning in to know maybe how closely aligned we are to your organization or not. But this last slide on Invest basically just shows the key sectors that we want to support, and it covers a broad range there, as you see. I'm not going to read them all out. But for the last year, the companies we've worked with then have contributed to 30% of the Northern Ireland turnover, 23% of employees, 75% of external sales, and 73% of exports. So a big contribution. So before I go straight in, and I've only got about 9 core slides, you'll be glad to hear, but the first slide I want to look at, which is the next one, is sort of to begin with some wider COVID-19 reflections, which I do believe have sort of shaped our hybrid thinking. And it goes without saying, first of all, on a personal level, I think we have to acknowledge and recognise the immediate and the long-term impacts on everyone in relation to COVID, especially those people who sadly lost loved ones over the last 2 years, and build that into where we are going forward. But on an organisational level as well, then I think we have got some positives and some real learnings from this enforced and seemingly enduring disruption that we've all been going through. And when I did a survey not long after I joined, about 6 months in, there were some key observations in it, which I've sort of wrapped up into some positive messages I feel that we've now got after 2 years of living with COVID. And these are as follows. So I genuinely do believe that we're now master practitioners in change management. All of us have gone on many and varied change management courses, but I think the pace at which we were thrown personally and professionally in dealing with COVID should not be underestimated. The next one, I think, true, authentic leadership. And I know there's a lot of talk now about compassionate leadership being needed going forward in relation to remote working. But I personally like the authentic one in the sense of real leadership and people being real about themselves and what they were going through. it was the ultimate leveler, COVID. It didn't matter your title, your grade, your location, anybody and everybody, it seemed, was getting it. And you were sort of removed from that corporate sort of facade of suited and booted in an office. Everybody was at home. Everybody was certainly frightened at certain stages. And it sort of made everything a lot more real and personal, and I think helped a lot from a leadership culture perspective. IT skills, rapid accelerated learning, and maybe that was just for me, but certainly grasping Zoom, Teams, all the other channels, and also, the stopping of printing, which I think was great, and learning how to save things properly and access them. So again, I think a positive there. We certainly felt decision-making accelerated too, that there was, when you had a scheduled meeting, you were more inclined at the end to say, right, okay, what have we agreed before we meet up again? So again, something to hold on to. The mental health culture, I feel, was a real positive in a sense, although many of us and our mental health was challenged. I think it gave a real heightened permission for people to say, you know what, I'm not so good today. And that was from everyone at every level. And I think that permission we need to continue going forward. And then the accelerated hybrid agenda for many organizations. I know there Liz was talking about some of the organizations that had started it, but I think for many that haven't, it has in a positive way cut through layers of bureaucracy that perhaps they would have had to go through to get to that stage. And interestingly, I was listening to a podcast last night out in a walk, and Daniel Pink mentioned a statistic that I thought was interesting, that he said, where else would you have had 100 million people working from home in over 4 days? It was an unheard of feat. So those are just some wider observations. And what I want to do now is to sort of segue to Liz's sort of research and insights. I want to share 4 slides from the hybrid briefing I did to staff in mid-December, just there literally 6 weeks ago. And I wanted to make sure that staff knew, although we'd sort of not really given a focused update on hybrid since the previous May, ironically, sort of COVID-19 restrictions gave us time to research both internally and externally, and that I was emphasising there was plenty had been going on in the background. And I think it is important for any of you that have organisations that are just starting out in this, definitely do a bit of benchmarking, and those were public and private sectors that we linked in with to see what their approach was going to be and what they were going to do. Also then internally, I'd set up a people and culture group and got some definite feedback through them, and then ad hoc feedback. We sort of got each line manager to keep the conversation going about it and feed it back into us. So that was sort of showing the horizon scanning, as it were, of where our policy came from. The next slide then, it was important to me to share some really key messages about what hybrid working was and what it wasn't. And this again echoes what Liz has said. It's about working, it's about where you work, and how you work. And the key, I suppose, line in this slide was that we are recommending a 40-60 split between office and remote working. And we also wanted to be clear about what it wasn't. The timing of doing this briefing was a bit of deliberation because it was 2 weeks before Christmas. Omicron was really high. It was DEFCON 1 from a point of view of anxiety. And there were some members of our leadership team maybe felt it might be better to wait. But I did feel that it was better to get it out there and clearly sort of communicate that this wasn't going to be the policy right now where we were. This was going to be in a hopeful time when we were managing COVID instead of COVID managing us. And it linked into, I did a counselling qualification well over 20 years ago. And I remember one of the definitions of stress was stress is about things that haven't happened yet. And I thought it was important that staff knew over the Christmas period, this is what we're thinking about. This is the pattern that we're thinking about. It's not being introduced immediately. There'll be a lead-in time. So we made the decision to do that, and I think it was the right decision, and that we got some good feedback from staff, and it was good to know what the plans were. So what it isn't, emphasising it's not where we are right now, and it does not relate to our current COVID working practice, and then echoing the point about it's not our personalised hours policy. Hybrid working is not a way to manage hours. We have other flexible options in which to look at that. So the next slide is probably the key slide in the deck that I shared, and it was about getting the best from both worlds because, we know there's a lot of sort of talk about staff saying, listen, we proved we could work well. Why do we need to come back into the office? And we know some organisations are taking different views in that. I have a view, I think, and this slide was hopefully going to explain, well, why do we want you to come back into the office? And I put it under the banner sort of 4 headings of collaborate, coach, create, and care. So the collaborate is very simply, the connect. We're social animals. We do like to be with each other. And another interesting insight I'd heard, I read in an article about, if we're all working from home, we'll miss out on these collaboration collisions, they call them, where in the previous days of meeting someone at the water cooler, as the photo shows below, or in the coffee dock, it would have prompted you to say, oh, just when I see you there, an idea's come into my head, or can we pick up on something? And that's all removed when we're all sitting in our rooms at home. So I think collaborating and that sort of spontaneity is important, that being back in the office will allow. Coaching, again, I've pretty strong views on coaching. As a qualified coach and real advocate of coaching, I do worry about people working from home all the time, especially the Gen Z and millennials. At that stage in your career, you need to be seen, you need to be heard, you need to be watching and listening. And it's very hard to do that on a laptop screen. And yes, you can schedule coaching sessions, but it doesn't beat being in a room with someone potentially that you're mentoring, seeing their body language, how they handle and hold themselves in a difficult situation, or equally where they excel, that you can give them really specific feedback. So the coaching one, again, I would say that is going to be definitely better if you're in the office. Create then. So again, if you're in a team that has a lot of creation and ideation responsibilities, being in that room, getting that energy and that vibe, having tried to do it on a laptop, I honestly do think it's better that when you're in a room together with a whiteboard, and you can, certainly get the whole thought processes going in a better way. And then the last one is care. A lot of focus we know has been on mental health. And again, I would fear that if people were working from home all the time and you'd schedule a 30-minute meeting with someone once a week, it's really not so easy to see how they are doing. And I think when people are in the office, you've a far better chance of being able to observe them and being able to say potentially to someone, you seem a bit quiet today, is everything okay? Do you want to grab a coffee? And that sort of more opportunity and ease to be able to check in on people, I think is very important. So those are sort of the 4 themes that I'm encouraging our staff as to why we would want you to come back in to the office. Equally, remote has benefits. That protected time to concentrate is brilliant if you're writing a strategy, a paper, preparing a presentation or whatever. And again, that should be recognised. A better work-life balance for sure, as long as you do switch off at the end of the day, and we can maybe talk about that we all have heard it's a bit more harder, it's a bit blurred, but definitely it does allow you to have a better work-life balance, and better for the climate with less commuting. As someone who was normally 50 minutes to an hour to get into Belfast, I certainly appreciate having that 50 minutes to an hour actually doing work. So as well as the green agenda, obviously very high on focus too. So that was getting the best from both worlds. And then just very quickly, our proposed rollout plan, which again, giving people a timeline. So December was the sharing of our thinking. Between now and March, and it is all pending executive guidance, because currently still in Northern Ireland, it's work from home. We will try to encourage, if that guidance is lifted, staff to come in even 1 day a week. We have 7 floors, and we have had 2 floors open ever since it started, when we've been able to, and we probably had about 100 people a week coming in, and again, quite often for mental health reasons, that they actually wanted to come in, or they didn't have enough room in their own homes to be able to concentrate and work properly. But in this period as well, we want to get teams to start the discussions, start talking about activities and their roles that they feel would be better carried out in the office, activities as a team that they feel they'd prefer to be together with, and other activities that can be carried out efficiently remotely, because I think it does relate quite a bit to what your role is and what the ask is. We're also looking at group pod plans there, which is highlighted in green, because at the moment it's just you go in and hot desk, and there was feedback and understandable feedback that if we start going back more, people are tribal, they like sitting with their own team. So we're going to try and look at having sort of group pod areas where people can coordinate and come in together. And then April is hopefully starting the pilot, again, pending executive guidance. But we want to start the pilot then and see how it goes. So next key steps for us, and it again sort of echoes to supporting line managers. I really do think we need to look at how we are going to support line managers to lead and motivate and manage staff. And I think having an agreed principles for hybrid working will help within this freedom in a framework mindset that I'm using. And I would love to say that was my own idea, but I heard it elsewhere. But I think it's a great phrase to have that freedom and autonomy within a broader framework that line managers can use. Again, for any of you about to start into this, you need to work in partnership, not only with your staff, but if any of you are unionised, you need to make sure the union are there at the table early as well. And they, again, will help in creating any of the materials, and they'll have the same questions that HR or the organisation will get. Technology, Liz mentioned, absolutely of paramount importance. I think technology is a key enabler, as Liz had said, to making it work or not, and to making that hybrid option of meetings, whether it will work or not, and ensure clear objectives. It's going to be a new way of how we're going to measure output and behaviours. And it'll be very much not on presenteeism, it'll be very much on output and being very clear what the output is. So that's step one. Step two then, I think, is about making sure we promote inclusion and fairness, and that's the diversity charter mark. We've just joined and got our bronze accreditation. So I want to keep that up front as well. And it's about making sure we don't make assumptions about who does or who doesn't want to work in a hybrid way, and really watch the unconscious bias that I think we all can have at times. Communicate about working preferences. I would like us to aim to be consistent. You know, you can't have the cookie cutter approach though, when everything apply to 580 staff in the same way. But to try and aim for consistency will help. And making sure that we offer other forms of flexibility for staff if there are other asks within their lives, and give people an equal voice, again, wherever they're working. I think that's really important. I think we're all accustomed now to the hands up in teams, and there's an etiquette there. So we need to make sure that's continued going forward if we have the hybrid format, and making sure there's equal opportunity for development and recognition and reward in how people are working. And then the last, step 3, is the highlight of the wellbeing agenda. And again, you know, we need to work out, how are we going to do this? How are we going to check in regularly with the team? And certainly from my perspective, you know, wellbeing should be on the agenda. It should be a standard item that, you know, there's absolutely no problem, and it should be actively encouraged to talk about how everyone is doing. I think we need to create activities to promote wellbeing. If people are working hybrid, you can link it in with your corporate social responsibility agenda, and maybe look at doing some team building opportunities to get people together at the same time as doing something good for the community. I think we as leaders definitely need to role model the behaviours we want. So managing screen time, you know, have good meeting discipline, and which I went out the window for me today, but every meeting should be 50 minutes so that you have those 10 minutes to, you know, go out, make a cup of coffee if needed, or just get out of the room and get your mind focused for the next one. The walk and talk meetings was something I communicated late last year as an option. And again, it's about giving staff permission that if you have a meeting where you don't need a monitor and Excel spreadsheet open, go for a walk and be openly saying, yeah, I'm out for a walk, and be able to have those catch-up meetings there and create that practice and behaviour. Tackle signs of overwork or digital presenteeism, again, making sure that people aren't on at all time, making sure your email etiquette is there to say, you know, I'm sending you this email now, but I don't expect a reply, but it suits me for my hours to send this email now. And again, you know, the old mantra, you got to see it to be it. You know, we as leaders need to really make sure that we you know, role model and, you know, walk the talk in relation to what way we see it working. And so the last slide is very much just the final thought. This is a leap of faith. You know, there was no COVID policy to take down off the shelf and open it up and go, right, how are we going to deal with this? And the same with this emerging out of COVID, hopefully. and I don't say this glibly, but we are really making it up as we go along, in a sense, and seeing how it works, and not apologise for that. I think working with staff, putting out the options, trying them, tweaking them as it evolves, and seeing what works and what doesn't is, I think, the way to go here. And everybody, collaborating and sharing what their approaches are, I think we'll get the final best result for each organisation in the end. So thank you very much, and over to you for questions.
Thank you so much, Denise. That was a very insightful and interesting talk. So before we jump into the pre-submitted questions and the questions in the chat box, I just want to tell you where everybody's from and give everybody a wee bit of a shout out who's written a comment. So we have here Mohammed from Bonnie, Scotland, who's tuned in to say hello. Where else have we got? Emma from London, Emil from Saudi Arabia. We have North Wales, Cambridge, Yorkshire, London, Manchester. We also have somebody from Petersburg, Cumbria, Surrey, Liverpool, Sussex, Hull, Eastbourne, Lancaster. We also have a board member in James in Belfast, and another board member called Gavin. He's also tuned in, and Gemma, our Chambers chairperson of the board as well, that says hello. So just some of the questions that pre-submitted questions, first of all, is from Katie. And the first question is there a tipping point between offering employees flexibility and a choice as to how they word and needing people to be physically back in the office? How are organisations creating the why to come back physically when arguably the job can be done from home? So Denise, do you want to have a stab at that question and then over to Liz?
Yeah, well, and I think it goes back to the slide where I was saying, why do we want you back in the office? And it's that sort of collaboration and creation and caring point of view. And I think it's working out with each team member, what is the ask of their role, and what do they feel they would benefit from collaborating and connecting with other colleagues. And there's going to be a bit of logistics here. If people are only coming in 2 days a week, and they have meetings with other colleagues in other departments, it's going to be about coordinating and making the most of that day that you're in, making sure that you're getting to meet who you want to meet and putting a little bit of, forward thinking in there. So, and I do think there's a bit of a duty of care for team members to come in and meet with their colleagues, whether that's for a monthly team meeting or if you have it fortnightly. I don't think that's unreasonable. And again, it's about giving notice. If you have it planned, well, then people can make plans accordingly. Because I think one last point, we need to remember 2 years ago, everybody was working 5 days a week and coming into an office and planning it and making it happen. So I think we need to just remember now we're going to shift into a more positive, absolutely working practice. And it'll be the same things about planning and organising accordingly. And
Liz, do you have anything else to add?
I mean, I think Denise has summarised there really nicely. I think from my perspective, communication planning really is the key. It is about those discussions between a manager and their teams about what's going to work best within your own organisation. Because as we've said, every organisation is different. There's not a one size fits all. I think there are definitely, as I mentioned in my presentation, there are definitely some times where it's a really good idea to be around a table together, to be brainstorming. But there might be other times where you're working on a long report, particularly like knowledge economy type work. And actually there are real benefits to doing that work at home where you can just really get on with it. I think whatever the situation, the important point is to keep the dialogue open. Unrelated, I mean, it's worth flagging. Some obviously employers have gone from different approaches. We've seen lots in the news about people in the city in London trying to entice staff back with various incentives. But I can say from our own polling with managers, that's not extensive. I think we've seen about just under a fifth trying those types of approaches to get people back in the office. It's really important, I think, more to have that communication, that honest dialogue with your staff.
So it comes back to communication. Right, another a pre-submitted question was, as a team leader, I observed that since working from home, team relationships began to deteriorate. Even though we all continue supporting each other in work questions, general interpersonal chats reduced massively. I organised some team building meetings to have a chat, to play a game, and tried to make sure this is not seen as a mandatory exercise. However, I observed that some team members joined the call without any interest. They felt that they had to. How to encourage team members? So, Liz, do you want to suggest any ways? How do you encourage team members, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I can talk a little bit about our experience as CMI as well. It's probably less something that's come out in the research. I think it's really tough. I think, as we've discussed, virtual meetings are very good for kind of these linear relationships, for the information sharing, but it's really difficult to replicate those kind of informal water cooler moments in these settings. And actually, research that we've done previously, and management transformer research, said this was one of the elements that employees often missed when they weren't in the office, that those kind of social interactions. I forgot Denise's phrase, but I thought it was a great one. Water cooler collision collaboration, exactly. I mean, I really think it's important to get people physically together. If you're doing everything virtually, you are going to lose out a little bit on that connection that you can get in person. That being said, I mean, working remotely, sometimes it can break down silos because you're able to work with a wider variety of people in the organization rather than possibly the relationships you would have had in the office. But I think you have to get people together to give them that opportunity to connect and collaborate. I think, for example, at CMI, across directorates, we're saying once a quarter, that's the sort of bare minimum that everyone needs to be in together as a team. And I think that works quite well. Whilst things are happening remotely, at CMI, we have had, ways that we've tried to get staff to connect. We've got, lots of online activities, online book clubs, art clubs, baking clubs. They're the kind of things that you can be doing something. So it's not just sitting at a screen and then kind of feeding back with your colleagues and having those connections. We've also had some kind of rotating coffee mornings. So the opportunity to talk to a senior member of staff in that forum. So it's a bit less formal than a regular meeting. But I think ultimately it's important to have some time where people can come together and interact.
And Denise, have you got any further things to add of what you've experienced or tried to engage with people?
I think echo what Liz said, but also just maybe two things I would say. I think the team number size is important. I mean, I have 20 in my team, and it's really hard even to visually see. I don't see 20 even. So I think you have to be realistic. Trying to do something all bonding together isn't going to work when there's 20 people. Within my 5 teams reporting to me, they all have little get-togethers. And then, when we're together, certainly the first 5 or 10 minutes is more informal. And, when COVID was at its height, it was, very much what Netflix are you watching, how much weight has put on, all those sort of, key questions that were live at the time. I think, to be honest with you, what we were saying as a team as well, we want to physically get together. I mean, there are 2 of my team I have still not met in real life in nearly 2 years, which is surreal. So, we want to be able to do that in the coming months. So I wouldn't force it. I also wouldn't force it as well. Let your team decide what's best for you to do. One of the things I read was that some organizations are having planned informal meetings. So you have a meeting with your team for 30 minutes, but there's absolutely nothing work related. It's all very much just about, how everybody's doing. I think that works if it's a smaller team and everyone knows each other and knows the stories. I think that's harder to do in a bigger team. One thing, the other suggestion just came into my head there when I was thinking, because I joined and, as I said, I had no way to meet people, we did a coffee roulette. I suggested right in the first sort of probably 3 or 4 months of COVID, where I and an executive gate crashed another meeting that wasn't either of our areas, and it was very much more about talking informally and getting to know and ask how people were doing, and that went down pretty well. So coffee roulette's another good way as well.
It's a new take and coffee roulette. I love that.
Yeah.
I'm going to try that myself. So one of another pre-submitted question was from Harriet, and greater flexibility has been hailed as a revolution for working parents, especially mothers, but how do we overcome the risk of proximity bias, with those more present in the office being given access to better opportunities and influence in decision making? Are there any tips for managers to make sure that they avoid this, especially if it is unconscious? Denise or Liz, whoever wants to speak first.
Yeah.
It's a tricky one. It's how to avoid unconscious bias and proximity bias, and there's
Yeah, I'm just trying to think. Liz, you go first then.
I was going to say, I'm happy to take this first, because we've actually, at CMI, we've actually done a big piece of work on this. We've been looking at inclusivity, and we worked with the Work Foundation, and we were looking at how the move to kind of more remote working, but the principles still they're the same. It's about that not being present in the office, how that may impact different groups of people. So that was a really interesting piece of work we did. And I think some of the, it's still so early in the days, I don't think people are necessarily, and managers and organizations are all necessarily thinking quite yet about the challenges that this may bring to inclusivity, because there's been an expectation that we will go back at some point, that maybe things would adjust to how they were. But from our perspective, we think the key areas around this are really ensuring that managers are adequately trained and prepared to manage hybrid teams. As I saw earlier in the presentation, most managers haven't had training. So and we're all very much still feeling our way. How should we do this? How do we manage our teams? But this could, the training could focus on a capacity to support performance, particularly the well-being of workers who are working remotely, effective communication again, using appropriate technology to support collaboration. Really thinking, I think from my perspective, really thinking about those personal development plans for your workers who are remote as much as those who are in the office. How will you give them those opportunities to take part in stretch projects, to present at events? How does that work? I think you've just got to be really mindful of that. We also think there's an element of developing action plans around hybrid and remote working, which prioritize diversity and inclusion. So really publicising those goals and policies on hybrid working to foster greater transparency and provide a leading example for other organisations. And it may be important to think about monitoring of take-up of hybrid working, flexible working, in terms of particular staff characteristics like gender, age, disability, etc., and developing mechanisms to embed flexibility in all working arrangements. So it's really interesting, but I really think it does take some organisational thought, training of managers to make sure that we get it right, because there are people who face discrimination in the workplace pre-hybrid working, and the danger is you don't want that to be deepened further by not being in the office and being out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that really is that just thinking about it there when you asked the question, it was definitely a think for a minute question, I think we need to be very clear what the role ask is. And there has to be a certain amount of honesty as well about timing in people's lives. Because I know myself, when my children were young, it did inhibit me at that point for going for certain roles that required lots of travel. So that I think it's very important from a promotional opportunity that the role ask is crystal clear at the outset. But I actually think it's more positive now for working mothers. In the days when I had 2 young children, you were expected still to drive in, drive out every day, be present. Whereas now I think it's going to be a far more positive time, that there will be that balance. And if you're crystal clear in your job advertisements about what's required, when and where, well, then it allows people to make informed decisions about whether, is this the right time for me right now in my life for this, or is it not?
So, and then I'm just looking at the time. We've 6 minutes left and we've lots of questions from the live chat. So I'm going to move on quickly to some of the questions that people who have asked them, and kind of following on from that, different strategies. One question is, hybrid and remote working is fine for ongoing teams. How are issues expected to be tackled, such as onboarding inductions, training, setting up, entering new teams. So have you got any suggestions, strategies of how you would onboard people and maybe establish a new team within organisations?
I suppose I was onboarded remotely. I experienced it, and it definitely wasn't the same of going in and meeting your team. I absolutely do feel I was cheated in the sense in that way of having that. If we're in an environment where, again, as I said, that you have the option to go in, I would be recommending that onboarding, induction and training and stuff is face-to-face, absolutely. And that you're actually physically in the organisation that you're part of, and you get to, feel the vibe. So then you can start your remote working pattern. But I would certainly be recommending for those key stages, it would be important to have face-to-face.
Liz, do you have anything to add, or will I go into the next question?
I don't think I've got anything to add to what Denise says. I would agree. I think there are particular things to think about with people who are new to the workplace as well, and onboarding. And I think that having some in-person presence is really important.
And then following on from that, it's basically looking from a home or from a work-life balance. Now, there's a question from, it says, how do you ensure work life and home life boundaries are not blurred?
Yeah, that's a really good one. I think, that as much as I didn't like the commute, there was a psychological, turning off and driving home, and you processed everything on that drive home. And then when you got home, hopefully you were in home mode. Whereas now, it's a case for me of walking out one door and walking in the other door. And I have got personal feedback that you're still very much worrying and not very present if your head's full of things. So I think you have to create your own sort of visual triggers. If you're lucky enough to have a separate room in your house where you can work. And I think if you are lucky enough to have a room, then it's about physically closing the door and putting sort of a complete sort of visual lockdown on it. For those people then that are maybe working at their kitchen tables or whatever, again, I just read something as simple as saying, you don't leave the laptop open. Even leaving the laptop open is that, I might look, you close it down. And these may seem very simple, but it's whatever I think works for the individual too, that they have to put those boundaries in and stick to them and create those habits. And also make sure their line managers and their colleagues aren't saying, I'll drop you an email later. There's behaviours here as well that play a big part of that. And that's about agreeing with your line manager and your team. Here's how I'm going to protect my mental health. Here's how we're going to work together as a team. I think that's a key part.
I think for me personally, working from home, and I had a situation that I go to the gym after my working day to make sure that I have that slotted in after work, that creates that boundary of de-stressing. So it is good to have an activity, maybe walk the dog, etc. if you have a dog, but things like that, set up an activity to establish boundaries to let you process the information and switch your brain family or work mode. Or Liz, have you got any suggestions?
Yeah, a couple of things to add to that. I mean, I agree about behaviours and how you can structure your own day. You read a lot about people creating their own walk to their new workplace that was home, but just having a walk first thing in the morning so it could mimic their commute, so they've got that clear headspace. So behaviours like that, I think, can be really good things that individuals can put in place to help with their own well-being and making sure that they don't have that blurring of boundaries. I also think more broadly, institutionally, one of the things, again, I work with the Work Foundation, that we considered is whether there's an organisational right to disconnect policy. So developing that through consultation with staff or worker representatives, you could have an internal policy to establish a shared approach to work communications that support workers to fully disengage outside of core hours. And that's going to be really good for wellbeing and productivity. So that could be something that organisations can look at as well. And I think it is about line managers role modeling those behaviours as well, and how you communicate with your staff. Like, I'm very clear to my team that they need to make sure they're switching off, make sure that they're not working into the middle of the night because they feel like they should, because the desk is in their room. So I think that's really important.
Brilliant. Folks, that's all that we have time for in terms of questions. So I'm sorry we didn't get to answer everybody. We've answered the common themes that are the questions throughout in the question box. Thank you so much to Liz for sharing her. Thank you so much for Denise. It has been a very engaging and fantastic webinar. So I hope you've learned something from it. From the CMI Northern Ireland board, thank you so much, everybody, and to the team behind it who's organised the links. So that's us for tonight. Thank you very much, and hopefully we'll see you soon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
So unfortunately, that is it for today's session. Thank you to everyone who joined us, and thank you, Olivia, Liz, and Denise, for your insights and expertise. Don't forget, if you're a member of CMI, you can log into the Management Direct using the link in the live chat, where you can find a wide range of exclusive and practical development resources and much more. If you're not yet a CMI member or subscriber, you can join our community via the link that's also in the live chat, where you can gain full access to our Management Direct portal. You can also sign up to the free CMI newsletter for the latest trends and tips for managers and leaders. Please also do take a few moments to let us know what your thoughts are on today's event by completing the evaluation form, which is also in the live chat. Thank you again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.